Hi everyone, welcome to my channel. Today, I'm going to explain and review a new drama story called Dikhianati Diselamatkan Satu Orang. This is an emotional and powerful story about betrayal, loyalty, gratitude, revenge, and an incredible comeback. At the center of the story is Carl, a successful industrial founder who spends years building a powerful business empire. He believes that the people closest to him will protect everything he has created, but unfortunately, the people he trusts the most become the reason for his downfall. His adopted children betray him, his fortune begins to disappear, and the empire he built with years of hard work is suddenly on the verge of collapse. Just when Carl believes there is no way to recover from this disaster, someone from his past returns. That person is Leonard, a young man Carl once helped when he had almost nothing. Carl never expected anything in return for his kindness, and he probably never imagined that the boy he once helped would one day become a powerful CEO. But Leonard has never forgotten what Carl did for him. Now, when Carl has lost almost everything, Leonard comes back with the power, influence, and determination to repay that old kindness. But this is not simply a story about a successful man helping a fallen businessman. Behind Carl's downfall is a much darker conspiracy, and Leonard soon realizes that the people responsible are far more dangerous than they appear. Together, Carl and Leonard must uncover the truth, confront powerful enemies, and fight to take back everything that was stolen from Carl. And in the end, their greatest challenge will be the biggest competition in the entire industrial world, where one victory could decide whether Carl's legacy is finally destroyed or rises again. So, without wasting any more time, let's begin this incredible story. The story begins with Carl at a point in his life where almost everything seems to have gone wrong. Not long ago, his name carried enormous respect throughout the industrial world. He was known as a determined businessman who had built his company from the ground up. Carl had not inherited his success, and he had not reached the top through luck. Every part of his empire represented years of sacrifice, difficult decisions, failures, and persistence. He had faced countless challenges while building his business, but he always believed that hard work and trust could create something that would last for generations. As Carl grew older and his company became more successful, his attention slowly shifted from expanding the business to protecting the people around him. He wanted his achievements to have a meaning beyond money. He wanted the people he considered family to benefit from everything he had built. This was one of the reasons he brought several adopted children into his life. Carl believed that family was not simply about blood. To him, family meant loyalty, responsibility, and standing beside one another when life became difficult. Unfortunately, Carl's greatest mistake was believing that everyone around him shared the same values. For a long time, Carl saw his adopted children as the future of his empire. He trusted them with responsibilities, gave them opportunities, and allowed them to become involved in the business he had spent his entire life building. He believed that one day they would protect his company after he was gone. He never imagined that the same people he was preparing to trust with his legacy would eventually turn against him. At first, the changes were so subtle that Carl did not recognize the danger. Decisions were made without his full knowledge. Important parts of the business began behaving differently. People he once trusted started becoming distant, and information that should have reached Carl directly seemed to disappear before it ever reached him. Yet Carl refused to believe that his own family could be responsible. Whenever someone suggested that something was wrong, Carl defended his adopted children. He believed they were simply making mistakes or trying to prove themselves. After all, he had raised them and given them opportunities. Why would they want to destroy the man who had given them everything? But behind Carl's back, something much bigger was already happening. His adopted children were no longer simply making mistakes. They were becoming part of a plan that would slowly weaken Carl's control over his own company. Financial problems began appearing where there had once been stability. Business relationships that had taken Carl decades to build started collapsing. Competitors suddenly seemed to know information that should have been confidential, and every attempt Carl made to stabilize the situation only seemed to create another problem. The more Carl tried to understand what was happening, the more isolated he became. Soon, the consequences became impossible to hide. Carl's company began suffering major losses, and the value of his assets started falling rapidly. The man who had once been considered one of the strongest figures in the industry was suddenly being treated as someone whose empire was on the verge of disappearing. Carl could hardly believe it. He had survived economic crises. He had defeated competitors who once seemed impossible to overcome. He had started with limited resources and turned his vision into a powerful industrial empire. Yet now, after everything he had accomplished, he found himself standing on the edge of bankruptcy. What hurt Carl most was not the financial loss. It was the realization that the people closest to him might have been involved. Still, even as the evidence began to pile up, Carl struggled to accept the truth. He kept searching for another explanation. He wanted to believe that there had been a misunderstanding, that his adopted children had not intentionally betrayed him, and that somehow his family could still be repaired. But reality was becoming increasingly cruel. Carl was losing his company, his influence, and his reputation. People who once surrounded him began disappearing. Business partners who had proudly stood beside him now avoided him. Rivals who had once feared his name started seeing an opportunity. And the adopted children he had trusted seemed more interested in protecting their own positions than saving the man who had built everything for them. For Carl, it felt as if his entire life was being erased in front of his eyes. Yet what Carl did not know was that the darkest part of his story was still ahead. The collapse of his empire was not simply the result of poor decisions or bad luck. Someone had been moving pieces behind the scenes, and the people Carl trusted had become part of a much larger conspiracy. And while Carl was fighting to understand how he had fallen so far, someone from his past was already preparing to return. His name was Leonard. Years earlier, Leonard had been just a young boy struggling through a difficult period in his life. He had very little power, very few opportunities, and no idea what his future would look like. Then Carl had entered his life and offered him help. Carl had not helped Leonard because he expected money, loyalty, or a future reward. He simply saw someone who needed assistance and chose to help. For Carl, that moment had eventually become just another memory among thousands of events in his long life. But for Leonard, it had meant everything. He never forgot Carl. And now, after years had passed, Leonard was no longer the helpless boy from Carl's memories. He had built a powerful career of his own and risen to the position of a successful CEO. He had wealth, influence, connections, and the ability to enter the industrial world as a force that could not easily be ignored. When Leonard learned that Carl had lost almost everything, he understood that the time had finally come to repay the kindness he had never forgotten. But Leonard was not returning merely to hand Carl financial assistance. He was returning to find out who had destroyed the man who had once helped him. And once Leonard began looking into Carl's downfall, he would discover that the truth was much more dangerous than anyone expected. Leonard's return changes the situation completely. Until this point, Carl has been fighting a losing battle almost entirely on his own, but now someone with the power to challenge the people responsible for his downfall has entered the game. However, Leonard understands that rushing into the conflict would be a mistake. Carl's enemies have already shown that they are willing to manipulate information, damage businesses, and turn people against one another. If Leonard wants to save Carl, he first needs to understand exactly how the collapse happened. When Leonard finally meets Carl again, the reunion is far more emotional than either of them expected. Carl initially struggles to recognize the confident CEO standing in front of him. The young boy he once helped has completely changed. Leonard is calm, professionally dressed, and carries himself with the confidence of someone who has spent years making difficult decisions. But despite his success, Leonard's attitude toward Carl remains respectful. Carl is surprised that Leonard has returned after so many years. He remembers helping the boy, but he never expected that small act of kindness to come back into his life in such a powerful way. Carl even tries to convince Leonard that he should stay away from him. He believes his own situation is already too dangerous and does not want Leonard to lose his reputation or business because of him. But Leonard refuses to walk away. He reminds Carl that there was a time when Leonard had nothing and Carl was the person who gave him an opportunity to stand again. Leonard explains that he never forgot that moment. He does not see Carl as a ruined businessman. He sees him as the man who once helped him when nobody else did. Carl becomes emotional because, after everything he has lost, hearing someone speak about his kindness reminds him that his life was not a complete failure. His company may be collapsing, his adopted children may have betrayed him, and his enemies may be celebrating his downfall, but at least one person remembers the good he did. Leonard then makes his intentions clear. He is not there simply to give Carl money. He wants to help him discover the truth. Leonard begins reviewing the financial records, business agreements, company transactions, and decisions that led to the collapse. At first, everything appears chaotic. There are losses in several areas of the company, broken partnerships, unexpected debts, and contracts that seem to have been approved without Carl's full involvement. But Leonard notices something important. The problems are too organized to be random. Someone has been deliberately creating weaknesses inside Carl's empire. The more Leonard investigates, the more suspicious details he discovers. Several decisions that damaged Carl's business were connected to people close to the family. Information had been transferred at exactly the right moments to benefit Carl's competitors. Some business opportunities were deliberately rejected, while other agreements exposed the company to unnecessary risks. Leonard realizes that whoever planned this did not simply want Carl to lose money. They wanted him to lose control. This discovery changes everything. Carl is still reluctant to accuse his adopted children without undeniable proof. Despite their betrayal, part of him still wants to believe there is some explanation. He remembers raising them, giving them opportunities, and treating them as his own family. Accepting that they deliberately participated in his downfall would mean admitting that one of the greatest mistakes of his life was trusting them. Leonard understands Carl's feelings, but he also knows that emotions can no longer control the investigation. He begins quietly tracing the movement of company assets. He discovers that certain resources connected to Carl's business have been redirected through complicated arrangements. The transactions are designed to appear legitimate, making them difficult to identify unless someone examines the entire pattern. Leonard brings these findings to Carl, and for the first time Carl begins to see the full picture. The betrayal is deeper than he imagined. One of the adopted children had been using Carl's trust to gain access to important information. Another had been building relationships with people outside the company who were interested in taking control of parts of Carl's empire. Together, their actions created confusion inside the business, while making Carl appear responsible for the failures. The plan was clever. If Carl fought back too aggressively, he would look unstable. If he stayed quiet, the company would continue losing money. And if he tried to replace the people responsible, they could accuse him of turning against his own family. It was a trap designed to make Carl destroy himself. Leonard becomes determined to break that trap. He does not immediately confront Carl's adopted children because he knows they could destroy evidence if they realize the investigation has begun. Instead, Leonard uses his position as a powerful CEO to put pressure on the business environment surrounding them. He contacts old industry connections and begins rebuilding relationships that had been damaged during Carl's downfall. Several business leaders who had abandoned Carl suddenly receive offers from Leonard's company. This creates a new sense of uncertainty among Carl's enemies. They had assumed Carl was finished. They had not expected Leonard. Soon, rumors begin spreading throughout the industry that a powerful CEO has taken an interest in Carl's situation. People who had been celebrating Carl's downfall start wondering whether the former founder still has an opportunity to return. Carl, however, remains cautious. He tells Leonard that the industrial world is ruthless and that enemies who spent so much effort destroying him will not simply surrender. Leonard agrees. In fact, he expects them to strike back. And they do. One morning, Carl receives news that another important part of his remaining business has been targeted. A major opportunity that could have helped stabilize his finances suddenly disappears. The people behind it have used their influence to block the deal before Carl can even respond. Carl feels defeated again. But Leonard is not surprised. Instead of becoming angry, he studies the situation and realizes that the enemy has revealed something valuable. Their reaction proves that someone is monitoring Carl's attempts to recover. Leonard deliberately allows certain information about their plans to become known. It is a calculated move designed to make the conspirators believe they have discovered Leonard's strategy. The enemy takes the bait. Within days, Leonard notices suspicious activity connected to one of the people working closely with Carl's adopted children. The person attempts to access confidential business information and quietly transfer it outside the company. Leonard finally has a lead. He arranges for the activity to be documented without confronting the person immediately. His goal is not simply to expose one employee. He wants to follow the trail all the way to the people who are controlling the conspiracy. Meanwhile, Carl begins changing as well. For the first time since his downfall, he stops seeing himself as a helpless victim. Leonard's presence reminds him that he still possesses something his enemies cannot easily take away: experience. Carl knows the industrial world better than almost anyone. He understands how negotiations work, how competitors think, and how businesses react under pressure. While Leonard has the modern influence and financial power needed to open new doors, Carl has the knowledge required to understand what is happening behind them. The two begin working as a team. Leonard handles the new alliances and strategic pressure, while Carl examines the old business relationships and recognizes patterns that a younger businessman might overlook. Their partnership quickly becomes more effective than either expected. But just when they begin making progress, Carl receives another devastating piece of information. A group of investors is preparing to officially declare that Carl is no longer capable of controlling his own business interests. If they succeed, Carl could lose the final legal and financial influence he still has over his legacy. Leonard understands the urgency immediately. They cannot simply defend themselves anymore. They have to make their first major move. Leonard tells Carl that if they want to take back the empire, they must stop reacting to their enemies and start forcing those enemies to react to them. Carl looks at Leonard and realizes how much the boy he once helped has changed. But beneath Leonard's confidence, Carl can still see the same gratitude that existed years ago. And now, for the first time since his empire began collapsing, Carl feels something he thought he had lost forever: hope. However, the next move will be dangerous. Because while Leonard and Carl are preparing their counterattack, the people behind the conspiracy are beginning to realize that Leonard is not simply protecting Carl. He is coming after them. And they are preparing a response that could put everything Carl has left at risk. The moment Carl and Leonard decide to stop defending themselves and start fighting back, the entire situation changes. Until now, their enemies have controlled the pace of the conflict. They created problems, watched Carl react, and used every reaction to push him closer to complete financial ruin. But Leonard understands that this pattern has to end. If they continue responding to every attack, they will always be one step behind. They need to create a situation where their enemies are forced to reveal themselves. Leonard begins by rebuilding Carl's credibility in the industrial world. He knows that money alone cannot restore an empire. Carl's greatest loss is not simply financial. His reputation has been damaged so badly that many people now believe he is a failed founder who lost control of his own company. Leonard wants to change that perception. He arranges several private meetings with influential business leaders who once worked with Carl. At first, many of them are hesitant. They remember the collapse and fear becoming involved in another conflict. But Leonard does not ask them to blindly trust Carl again. Instead, he presents them with evidence showing that the collapse was not the result of Carl's incompetence. Slowly, people begin to reconsider what they believed. One former business partner admits that he had received unusual information before ending his relationship with Carl. Another reveals that someone had pressured him to cancel an important agreement. A third businessman remembers being warned that Carl's company was about to collapse long before the public knew anything about it. These statements confirm Leonard's suspicion. The downfall had been planned long before Carl realized he was in danger. Carl listens carefully as each piece of information comes together. He begins remembering small events from the past that he once dismissed as meaningless. Meetings that were suddenly cancelled. Documents that arrived late. Employees who disappeared without explanation. Business partners who changed their attitudes overnight. For the first time, Carl understands that the conspiracy had been surrounding him while he was still defending the people responsible. The realization hurts deeply. Carl admits to Leonard that he had spent so much time believing in his family that he ignored warning signs. Leonard does not blame him. Instead, he tells Carl that trusting people is not weakness. The real mistake was allowing dishonest people to use that trust against him. Those words give Carl strength. Meanwhile, Leonard begins preparing a larger strategy. He knows that exposing the conspiracy publicly too early could be dangerous. If the evidence is incomplete, the conspirators could claim that Leonard is simply trying to attack Carl's adopted children for personal reasons. Leonard needs undeniable proof connecting them to the financial destruction. So he creates a controlled opportunity. Leonard allows certain information about a possible business recovery project to reach the people he suspects. The project appears to be a chance for Carl to regain part of his lost influence. It is exactly the kind of opportunity Carl's enemies would want to stop. The information spreads quickly. Within a short time, someone attempts to interfere with the project. Leonard had expected this. His team tracks the interference and discovers that the instructions originate from an intermediary connected to Carl's adopted children. The trail is still incomplete, but it gives Leonard enough information to understand how the conspiracy operates. The enemy is using several layers of people to hide the real decision-makers. Leonard decides to remove one layer at a time. At the same time, Carl begins taking a more active role. He returns to meetings he once thought he would never attend again. Some people are shocked to see him. Others are openly skeptical. But Carl refuses to act like a defeated man. He speaks calmly about the company he built and the future he still believes is possible. His confidence begins affecting people. The industrial community slowly starts talking about Carl again, but this time the conversation is different. Instead of discussing his bankruptcy, people begin discussing his comeback. This worries his enemies. They had expected Carl to disappear quietly. They believed that once his company was weakened and his reputation damaged, nobody would support him. Leonard's involvement has destroyed that assumption. The adopted children become increasingly nervous. They begin questioning each other about what Leonard knows. They know that Carl does not have enough power to threaten them alone, but Leonard is different. He has his own company, his own resources, and relationships throughout the industry. One of them suggests that Leonard should be pressured financially. Another believes that Leonard can be discredited. But neither realizes that Leonard has already anticipated these possibilities. Instead of protecting himself from every possible attack, he creates a situation where the conspirators believe one of their plans has succeeded. Leonard appears to suffer a setback. A major business deal connected to his company suddenly faces unexpected opposition. Several investors begin questioning his decisions, and rumors spread that Leonard has become too personally involved in Carl's problems. To outsiders, it looks like Leonard's strategy is failing. Carl becomes concerned. He asks Leonard whether helping him has put his own company at risk. Leonard simply smiles and tells Carl not to worry. What Carl does not know is that the setback is intentional. Leonard wants his enemies to become confident. When people believe they are winning, they become careless. And soon they do. A hidden financial transaction is made in an attempt to take advantage of Leonard's supposed weakness. Leonard's team records the entire process. The transaction connects several companies that appear unrelated on the surface, but are secretly linked to the same network surrounding Carl's adopted children. The evidence is finally beginning to form a complete chain. But before Leonard can reveal it, the enemy makes a bold move against Carl. They attempt to force him completely out of the industrial market. A group of powerful business figures announces a new coalition that could control one of the most important sectors in the industry. If the coalition succeeds, Carl will have almost no realistic path back into the market. Carl understands what this means. His enemies are trying to close every door before he can recover. But this time, Carl does not panic. He tells Leonard that if they cannot enter through the existing doors, they will build a new one. The statement surprises Leonard, but it also reminds him why Carl became successful in the first place. Carl still has the mind of a founder. Together, they begin developing a new business strategy based on one of Carl's old industrial ideas. The concept had once been considered too ambitious, but modern technology and Leonard's resources make it possible. The project could become the foundation of Carl's comeback. However, launching it would require an enormous amount of investment, and more importantly, it would attract the attention of every major competitor. Leonard decides to take the risk. He announces that his company will support a major industrial initiative connected to Carl. The announcement sends shockwaves through the business world. Carl's enemies are furious. They had spent years trying to erase Carl's name, and now his name is appearing beside one of the most powerful CEOs in the industry. But the biggest surprise comes when Leonard reveals that the project will eventually compete in the most prestigious industrial competition in the world. That competition attracts the strongest companies, most influential investors, and most ambitious business leaders. Winning it would not only bring enormous opportunities, it would prove that Carl's industrial vision still has value. For Carl, the competition becomes more than a business goal. It becomes a chance to reclaim his dignity. But the conspirators understand the danger. If Carl and Leonard win, the entire story surrounding Carl's downfall could collapse. People would begin questioning how such a successful founder was pushed toward bankruptcy in the first place. So the enemies decide that they cannot allow Carl to reach the competition. They begin preparing their most aggressive attack yet. At the same time, Leonard receives a warning from one of his contacts. Someone inside Carl's remaining network is secretly reporting their plans to the enemy. There is still a traitor close to them. Carl is stunned. After everything that has happened, he realizes that even now, someone around him may still be working against him. Leonard tells him not to lose hope. They have already survived the first wave of attacks. Now they must identify the traitor before the final competition begins. Because if they fail, the conspiracy could destroy their last chance to restore Carl's legacy. And this time, the enemy is no longer trying to make Carl bankrupt. They are preparing to make sure he never rises again. The discovery that someone inside their own circle is leaking information makes the situation far more dangerous. Carl had already learned that trusting the wrong people could destroy everything, and now he is forced to face the possibility that the same mistake could happen again. The difference this time is that Leonard refuses to let fear control their decisions. He knows that the traitor is counting on Carl becoming suspicious of everyone around him. If Carl starts accusing people without evidence, the enemy will have achieved exactly what they want. Leonard tells Carl that they need to remain calm and continue as if they know nothing. The upcoming industrial project must proceed according to schedule. They will simply change how information is shared. Different people will receive different pieces of information, allowing Leonard to identify which information eventually reaches the enemy. Carl agrees, even though it is difficult for him. He has spent years believing that honesty and loyalty are enough to hold a family together. Now he has to think like a strategist, carefully deciding who deserves to know the truth. The first test begins with a confidential meeting about the project that could eventually take Carl and Leonard into the world's biggest industrial competition. Only a small number of people are invited. Leonard intentionally gives each person slightly different information about the next stage of development. Carl watches quietly. For several days, nothing happens. Then one of the competing companies suddenly changes its strategy. They announce a move that directly counters a detail that only one person from Leonard's meeting should have known. Leonard immediately understands what has happened. The information came from inside. But instead of confronting the suspected person, he quietly begins following their movements. He discovers that the person has been communicating with an outside intermediary. The intermediary appears to work for a consulting group, but Leonard recognizes the company name from his earlier investigation. It is another connection to the conspiracy. Leonard now has enough evidence to begin building a stronger case, but he still needs the final link connecting the network directly to Carl's adopted children. Meanwhile, the pressure on Carl increases. The adopted children begin appearing publicly as though they are completely innocent. They present themselves as the people trying to stabilize the situation. They even suggest that Carl is being manipulated by Leonard. Their strategy is clever because it attacks Leonard's reputation while pretending to protect Carl. Some people in the industry begin asking whether Leonard has a hidden motive. Carl hears the rumors and becomes angry, but Leonard tells him not to respond emotionally. He understands that the enemy wants them to fight publicly because a public argument would distract everyone from the real issue. Instead, Leonard decides to let the rumors continue. While everyone is watching the public drama, his team quietly follows the financial trail. Eventually, they discover a series of payments that connect one of the adopted children to an outside company. The payments were disguised as legitimate consulting fees, but the timing makes them suspicious. They began shortly before several major decisions that damaged Carl's company. Leonard shares the information with Carl. Carl is devastated. He recognizes the name of the adopted child immediately. This was someone he had personally trusted. Someone he had defended when others questioned their loyalty. For a moment, Carl cannot speak. Leonard gives him time to process the truth. He knows that evidence can prove betrayal, but evidence cannot erase the emotional bond Carl once had with the person involved. Finally, Carl admits that this is the part of the entire situation that hurts most. Losing money is painful. Losing a company is painful. But discovering that someone he considered family deliberately helped destroy his life is something he cannot easily accept. Leonard tells him that he does not have to forgive them. He only needs to stop allowing them to control his future. Those words give Carl the strength to continue. Together, they decide to expose the financial connection carefully. They do not reveal everything at once. Instead, they use the evidence to pressure the outside intermediary. Leonard approaches the person indirectly and offers them an opportunity to protect themselves by cooperating. At first, the intermediary refuses. They believe the people behind the conspiracy will protect them. Leonard calmly explains that powerful people often protect themselves first when things begin falling apart. The warning works. The intermediary eventually reveals that Carl's downfall was not designed by one person. Several business interests were involved, and Carl's adopted children became useful partners because they had access to Carl's company and trusted positions. The goal had always been bigger than stealing money. They wanted to take control of Carl's industrial legacy. By weakening Carl financially, damaging his reputation, and separating him from his allies, they could eventually absorb the valuable parts of his business. Carl listens to the confession with a mixture of anger and sadness. Everything finally makes sense. The problems that once seemed unrelated were all connected. The cancelled contracts, missing information, financial losses, broken partnerships, and sudden attacks were all pieces of the same plan. Leonard now knows who they are dealing with. But he also knows that exposing the conspiracy will not be enough. The conspirators still have enormous influence. They can challenge Carl through legal channels, business competition, and public opinion. And they have one major advantage. The final industrial competition is approaching. The competition is designed to bring together the strongest companies in the world. Each participant must present a major industrial project, and the winner gains enormous recognition, investment opportunities, and access to new markets. Carl's enemies intend to use the competition to destroy him publicly. They want Carl to enter the event, fail in front of the entire industry, and prove that his era is over. Leonard sees an opportunity. If they can win, Carl's reputation will be restored on the biggest possible stage. But winning will not be easy. The competitors include companies with far greater resources than Carl currently possesses. Some have teams of experts working around the clock. Others have years of technological development behind them. Carl's project is ambitious, but they still need to prove that it can compete. For the first time in years, Carl returns fully to his role as a founder. He begins working with the technical and business teams, questioning every detail and challenging every assumption. Leonard watches him closely and realizes that the broken man he met earlier is slowly disappearing. The old Carl is returning. He is still wounded by the betrayal, but now his pain is becoming determination. The preparation period becomes intense. Every day brings another challenge. The project must be improved, tested, and protected from sabotage. Leonard strengthens security around the company, while Carl focuses on making the concept practical and competitive. Then, just when they believe they are finally gaining momentum, something goes wrong. A critical component needed for the project suddenly becomes unavailable. The supplier claims there has been a major production problem and cannot fulfill the agreement. Carl immediately suspects sabotage. Leonard investigates and discovers that the supplier has recently received a major investment from a company connected to one of their competitors. The pattern is becoming obvious. The enemy is trying to slow them down without attacking them directly. Leonard refuses to panic. He searches for alternative suppliers, but every major option seems to be blocked. Carl then remembers an old business contact who had once worked with him during the early years of his company. The relationship had ended years ago, but Carl believes the person may still be willing to help. They contact the old partner. At first, the man is hesitant because he knows how dangerous the current situation is. But after hearing what happened to Carl, he agrees to provide assistance. This unexpected support gives Carl another reminder that not everyone has abandoned him. Some people still remember who he was before the conspiracy destroyed his reputation. With the new supply secured, the project moves forward again. But Leonard knows the enemy will not stop. He tells Carl that every obstacle they have faced so far has been designed to test how long they can survive. The final competition is now close. And Leonard makes a promise to Carl. They will not enter that competition simply to participate. They will enter to win. However, just before the final preparations are completed, Leonard receives a message that changes everything. The people behind the conspiracy have discovered that Leonard possesses evidence against them. They are no longer trying to hide. They are preparing to strike directly. And this time, their target is not Carl's business. It is Leonard himself. Leonard's warning arrives at the worst possible moment. The final industrial competition is getting closer, Carl's new project is finally taking shape, and for the first time, their comeback looks realistic. But the message Leonard receives makes one thing clear: the The people behind Carl's downfall now understand that Leonard is the biggest obstacle standing between them and complete control of Carl's legacy. Leonard does not tell Carl everything immediately. He knows Carl has already suffered enough, and he does not want him to make an emotional decision. Instead, Leonard quietly increases security around the company and begins examining every person who has access to sensitive information. He also moves the most important evidence to a secure location so that even if something happens to him, the conspiracy cannot simply disappear. But the enemy is watching. Not long after Leonard changes his security arrangements, an unexpected problem appears inside his own company. Several employees receive suspicious messages, and one of Leonard's important business accounts is targeted by an unauthorized attempt to gain access. Nothing is stolen, but the attempt sends a clear warning. The conspirators are testing Leonard. They want him to understand that they can reach him whenever they choose. Carl becomes extremely concerned when he discovers what is happening. He tells Leonard that he should stop helping him before the situation becomes even more dangerous. Carl believes that his own problems have already cost him enough, and he does not want Leonard's company or future to be destroyed because of his fight. Leonard refuses. He reminds Carl that he did not return because he felt sorry for him. He returned because Carl once changed his life. Now Leonard has the power to stand beside him, and he intends to use that power. For Carl, those words are deeply meaningful. After losing the trust of the people he considered family, Leonard's loyalty becomes one of the few things Carl can still rely on. Meanwhile, the people behind the conspiracy begin preparing a much larger attack. They realize that destroying Leonard through direct pressure may not work, so they decide to attack his reputation instead. False information begins circulating throughout the business world. The rumors claim that Leonard has used his company's resources for personal reasons. Some reports suggest that his involvement with Carl is creating conflicts of interest. Others claim that Leonard is trying to take control of Carl's remaining assets for himself. The accusations spread quickly because the industrial community already knows that Leonard has become closely connected to Carl. Carl is furious when he hears them. He wants to publicly defend Leonard, but Leonard stops him. Leonard explains that the rumors are exactly what they expected. If they react emotionally, they will give the enemy more opportunities to manipulate the story. Instead, Leonard decides to respond with facts. He prepares a detailed record of every investment his company has made in the project. Every transaction is documented, every decision is explained, and every connection between Leonard's company and Carl's recovery is made transparent. The strategy works. Several business leaders begin realizing that the accusations do not match the financial records. But the enemy does not give up. They release another claim, this time suggesting that Carl himself is no longer mentally capable of making major business decisions. This attack hurts Carl more than the financial accusations. For decades, his intelligence and judgment were the foundation of his reputation. Now his enemies are trying to convince the industry that he has become incapable of leading. Carl feels humiliated. He asks Leonard whether people will ever respect him again. Leonard tells him that respect is not restored by asking people to believe you. It is restored by proving what you are capable of. Those words push Carl to work even harder on the industrial project. The final competition is approaching quickly. Carl and Leonard's team spends long days reviewing every part of the project. They test the technology, improve the business model, and prepare for every possible question the judges could ask. The project is not perfect. There are still weaknesses. But Carl understands the industry well enough to know that perfection is not the goal. The goal is to create something strong enough to survive the competition. Leonard focuses on the strategic side. He studies the other competitors and learns about their strengths, weaknesses, and likely strategies. Several companies have enormous budgets and far more resources than Carl and Leonard. One competitor in particular appears almost unbeatable. The company has a massive international network and has already won several major industrial awards. Its leadership has openly suggested that Carl's return is nothing more than an old businessman's attempt to regain relevance. The statement reaches Carl. Instead of becoming angry, he smiles. He tells Leonard that people have underestimated him before. That has never stopped him. In fact, Carl realizes that being underestimated may be their greatest advantage. While the competitors focus on defeating the version of Carl they remember, Carl is rebuilding himself with Leonard's support. At the same time, Leonard continues investigating the conspiracy. The evidence they collected from the intermediary reveals another important connection. A senior figure within the business network has been coordinating several attacks against Carl. This person has remained hidden throughout the entire operation. Leonard believes that if they can expose this figure, the entire conspiracy could collapse. But reaching that person will be difficult. The hidden leader has influence over several companies and business organizations. They have protected themselves by keeping their involvement indirect. Leonard decides to use the upcoming competition as bait. He knows that the hidden leader will be extremely interested in stopping Carl from winning. If Leonard makes it appear that Carl's project has a vulnerability, the conspirator may attempt to exploit it. Carl agrees to the plan. They deliberately allow a small piece of misleading information to spread through an unofficial channel. The information suggests that their project may have a weakness in one of its key components. Within a short time, a competitor begins asking questions that directly relate to the false information. Leonard knows they have taken the bait. His team tracks the source of the questions and discovers a chain of communications leading to a company connected to the hidden figure. Now they finally have a path toward the person who has been controlling the conspiracy. But before they can complete the investigation, another problem appears. One of Carl's adopted children approaches him privately. For the first time, the person appears frightened. They admit that they made mistakes and suggest that things have gone much further than they originally intended. Carl is shocked. He asks why they betrayed him. The adopted child struggles to answer. They explain that they were promised power, control, and a future within the company. They believed that pushing Carl aside would allow them to become stronger. They were convinced that Carl's empire was too large to fail and that they would eventually benefit from taking control. But the plan changed. Once Carl became weak, the people behind the conspiracy wanted everything, not just control over certain parts of the company. The adopted child now realizes that they were never truly in charge. They were being used. Carl listens silently. He wants to know who is behind everything. But before the adopted child can give him a name, they reveal something even more important. The people controlling the conspiracy know about the upcoming competition. And they have a plan to make sure Carl's project never reaches the final stage. Leonard immediately realizes the seriousness of the warning. If their project is sabotaged before the competition even begins, all their hard work could disappear. They increase security again, but this time they also inspect every part of the project from the beginning. They discover several suspicious changes in the technical records. Someone has attempted to alter important specifications. Fortunately, the changes were caught before they caused serious damage. Carl realizes how close they came to disaster. The situation becomes a race against time. The competition is only days away. The conspiracy is closing in. Carl's adopted children are divided, the hidden leader is still protected, and Leonard's enemies are becoming increasingly aggressive. Yet despite all of this, Carl refuses to step back. He looks at the project that represents his final chance and tells Leonard that he has spent his entire life building things that others tried to destroy. This time, he will not run. Leonard agrees. They will enter the competition. They will face every rival. And they will expose the people who tried to destroy Carl's life. But neither of them realizes that the final stage of the conspiracy has already begun. The enemy has found a way to enter the competition itself. And if their plan succeeds, Carl and Leonard could lose everything in front of the entire industrial world. The closer the industrial competition gets, the more intense the pressure becomes. Carl and Leonard have managed to survive financial attacks, public rumors, internal betrayal, and attempts to sabotage their project, but now they are entering the most dangerous stage of the entire battle. The competition will place everything under public scrutiny, and the people who want Carl destroyed know that this may be their final opportunity to stop him. Leonard understands that the enemy has already found a way to influence the competition from within. He does not know exactly how far their influence reaches, but he refuses to take any chances. Every document is reviewed again, every technical component is inspected, and every member of the team is carefully evaluated. Carl initially feels uncomfortable with the level of caution, but he eventually understands why Leonard is doing it. They have already learned that the enemy does not need to attack openly. They only need one small opportunity. As the competition begins, the atmosphere in the industrial world changes completely. Major companies arrive from different regions, bringing their most advanced projects and their strongest teams. Investors, industry leaders, experts, and journalists gather to witness the event. Carl arrives with Leonard. For many people in the audience, Carl's appearance is unexpected. Some remember him as the legendary founder who once dominated the industry. Others remember only the businessman whose empire collapsed. Whispers spread through the crowd as people wonder whether Carl has returned to prove himself or simply to make one final attempt at relevance. Carl hears the comments but remains calm. He has already experienced the worst possible humiliation. Now he has nothing to prove through anger. His goal is simple. He wants to show that the man who built his empire is still capable of building something great. Leonard stays beside him. The opening stage of the competition begins with each company presenting its vision. Several competitors immediately impress the audience. Their projects are polished, expensive, and supported by enormous teams. When Carl and Leonard's turn approaches, the pressure becomes overwhelming. Carl looks at the project one final time. He remembers the years he spent building his original company. He remembers the people who once believed in him. He remembers the betrayal that brought him to the edge of bankruptcy. And then he remembers Leonard, the boy he once helped. The boy who returned when everyone else had disappeared. Carl steps forward. Instead of focusing only on the technical features of their project, he explains the philosophy behind it. He talks about creating an industrial system that can grow sustainably and provide long-term value rather than simply producing short-term profits. The audience listens carefully. Some are surprised by how confident Carl sounds. Leonard then presents the business strategy and explains how the project can compete in modern markets. The presentation goes better than expected. For the first time, the competitors realize that Carl is not simply trying to revive his old empire. He is creating something new. But the enemies are not impressed. Behind the scenes, someone begins making moves. A member of the competition staff receives a suspicious instruction regarding Carl's project. The instruction appears to be an ordinary procedural request, but Leonard's security team notices that it does not follow the standard process. They immediately investigate. The request was designed to give an outside party access to confidential technical information. Leonard realizes that the enemy is trying to steal their project details. He allows the process to continue under controlled conditions. A false set of documents is prepared and placed where the suspected person can access them. Within hours, the documents leave the competition facility. Leonard follows the trail. The information reaches a company connected to one of the conspirators. This is the confirmation they needed. The conspiracy has entered the competition. But Leonard does not expose them immediately. He wants to identify the person giving the orders. Meanwhile, the competition continues. Carl and Leonard's project advances to the next stage. Their success surprises many people, especially those who expected Carl to fail. Even some of Carl's former business partners begin approaching him again. They tell him that they had been wrong to abandon him. Carl does not celebrate. He understands that these people returned because they now see an opportunity. He politely accepts their support but makes it clear that trust must be earned again. This is one of the biggest changes in Carl's character. Before his downfall, Carl trusted people because he believed loyalty would naturally follow kindness. Now he understands that trust must be supported by actions. Leonard notices the change. He tells Carl that losing everything forced him to see people more clearly. Carl agrees. He says that perhaps his downfall taught him something his success never could. At the same time, Leonard receives information from the adopted child who previously confessed. The person reveals the name of someone who has been communicating with a hidden leader. This name shocks Leonard. It belongs to a respected figure in the industrial world, someone who appears to have no reason to be involved in Carl's downfall. Leonard begins investigating the person immediately. The evidence gradually becomes stronger. Several companies connected to this individual benefited from Carl's collapse. The same companies later became part of the coalition attempting to block Carl from returning to the market. The connection is too strong to ignore. Leonard now believes they have found the person who has been coordinating the entire operation. But there is still a problem. They need undeniable proof. A suspicion is not enough. So Leonard develops another strategy. He sends a carefully controlled message suggesting that Carl and Leonard have discovered the entire conspiracy and possess evidence that could destroy the network. The message is never intended for the public. It is designed to reach the hidden leader. If the person believes exposure is imminent, they may make a desperate move. The plan works. Within a short time, one of the conspirators' companies attempts to acquire a piece of evidence before Leonard can secure it. Leonard's team intercepts the attempt. Now they finally have direct proof that the hidden leader is involved. Leonard prepares to reveal everything. But the enemy makes one final move. During the next stage of the competition, Carl's project suddenly experiences a technical problem. The system begins behaving differently from the way it did during testing. The audience notices. The judges become concerned. Carl's team tries to stabilize the system, but the problem is more serious than expected. For a moment, it appears that the project may fail. The competitors watch carefully. Some look concerned. Others look almost satisfied. Carl feels the old pressure returning. He knows that if the project fails publicly, the people who doubted him will use the moment as proof that he can no longer lead. But Leonard remains calm. He immediately asks the technical team to compare the current system data with the original records. They discover something unusual. The problem did not originate from the main system. Someone had altered a secondary component before the presentation. The sabotage has finally been confirmed. Carl refuses to panic. He tells his team to stay focused. They work quickly to restore the original configuration. The audience watches as the situation slowly stabilizes. After several tense moments, the project begins functioning again. The judges allow the presentation to continue. Carl completes the demonstration. The room becomes silent. Then the response is stronger than expected. The project has survived. And more importantly, the sabotage has failed. Leonard quietly looks toward the audience. He notices the hidden leader watching them. For the first time, their eyes meet. The person realizes that Leonard knows. The expression on the conspirator's face changes. They understand that the game is almost over. But instead of looking frightened, the person smiles. That smile worries Leonard. Because it suggests that they still have one more move. And whatever that final move is, it may be powerful enough to threaten not only the competition, but everything Carl and Leonard have worked so hard to rebuild. Leonard cannot ignore the smile on the conspirator's face. After everything they have uncovered, that calm expression tells him that the enemy still believes they have an advantage. Leonard immediately becomes more cautious. He knows that exposing the conspiracy is important, but they cannot allow their confidence to make them careless at the most critical moment. Carl, meanwhile, is still focused on the competition. His project has survived the sabotage, and the judges have allowed the presentation to continue. For the first time, the people watching are no longer seeing him as a fallen founder. They are beginning to see the old Carl again, the businessman who knows exactly what he is doing. But Carl understands that surviving one attack does not mean the battle is over. The next stage of the competition requires every finalist to defend their project against a panel of industry experts. The experts challenge the participants with difficult questions about cost, long-term development, market stability, and future expansion. Several competitors struggle under the pressure. When Carl's turn arrives, the room becomes noticeably quieter. One expert asks whether Carl's project can truly compete against companies with far greater financial resources. Carl does not become defensive. He explains that money can accelerate development, but money alone cannot create a strong industrial vision. He speaks about the years he spent building his original company and the lessons he learned from failure. He admits that his first empire eventually collapsed, but he refuses to treat that collapse as proof that his ideas were worthless. Instead, he says that failure taught him how to build something stronger. The answer impresses the panel. Leonard watches proudly. Carl is no longer trying to hide his downfall. He is using it as part of his strength. The presentation continues, and Carl answers question after question with confidence. Leonard then explains how the project can be expanded using his company's resources and modern business network. By the end of the session, their project receives strong approval. The competition officials announce that Carl and Leonard have advanced to the final stage. The news spreads rapidly through the industrial world. Carl's enemies are furious. They had expected the sabotage to end his chances, but instead, the failed attack has made his return even more impressive. The hidden leader realizes that continuing to attack Carl through indirect methods may no longer be enough. A more dangerous plan is prepared. Meanwhile, Leonard finally decides that the time has come to confront the hidden leader. He arranges a private meeting. Carl asks whether he should come with him, but Leonard refuses. He wants to understand exactly what the person knows and what they are planning before bringing Carl into the conversation. Leonard enters the meeting alone. The hidden leader welcomes him with complete confidence. They congratulate Leonard for reaching the final stage of the competition and even compliment his ability to protect Carl. Leonard does not respond to the praise. He tells the person that he knows about the financial transactions, the false information, the sabotage, and the network of companies involved in Carl's downfall. The hidden leader simply smiles. They deny nothing. Instead, they argue that Carl's empire was destined to fall. They claim that the industrial world does not reward weakness, and Carl became weak because he trusted the wrong people. Leonard becomes angry but remains controlled. He tells the person that what happened to Carl was not fair competition. It was manipulation. The hidden leader responds that business has never been fair. Then they reveal something Leonard did not expect. They say that Carl's adopted children were not the true reason for the downfall. They were only tools. The real objective was always Carl's legacy. The hidden leader wanted control over the most valuable parts of Carl's industrial network and believed that destroying Carl's reputation would make the transition easier. Leonard asks why they care so much about Carl's legacy. The answer reveals that the hidden leader had a long-standing rivalry with Carl. Years earlier, Carl had built a business strategy that changed the industrial market. His success had prevented several competing groups from gaining control over important sectors. The hidden leader had never forgiven him. They waited for the right opportunity. But when Carl fell, they finally understood the consequences. Carl listens without interrupting. Then he tells them that an apology does not erase what happened. But accepting responsibility is the first step toward becoming a better person. He does not promise to restore the old family relationship. Instead, he tells them that the future depends on what they choose to do from this point forward. It is a difficult but honest answer. Carl has learned that forgiveness does not always mean returning to the way things were. Sometimes forgiveness means letting go of anger while still keeping the lessons you learned. Leonard supports Carl's decision. He knows that Carl has finally stopped allowing his past to control him. As time passes, the company becomes one of the strongest names in the industry once again. But this time, Carl's success feels different. He does not build the empire simply to prove his enemies wrong. He builds because he has a new vision. He wants the company to create opportunities for talented people who may not have the advantages others have. He remembers what it felt like to struggle, to be underestimated, and to wonder whether anyone would give him a chance. That is why he encourages the company to support young entrepreneurs and new ideas. Leonard becomes one of the strongest supporters of this vision. Together, they create opportunities for people who remind them of their younger selves. Carl sees something meaningful in this. Years ago, he helped one young boy. That one decision eventually changed both of their lives. Now he has the chance to help many more people. This becomes the true continuation of his legacy. One evening, Carl and Leonard attend a major industrial event together. Carl is invited to speak about his comeback. The audience expects him to talk about winning the competition, defeating his rivals, or rebuilding his company. Instead, Carl tells them about failure. He explains that success can make people believe they are invincible. When everything is going well, it is easy to believe that money, power, and reputation will always protect you. But life can change quickly. The real test is what you do when everything disappears. Carl says that when he lost his company, he believed his story was ending. It was actually beginning again. He explains that betrayal taught him to be careful. Failure taught him to be resilient. And Leonard taught him that genuine kindness can return when you least expect it. The audience listens closely. Carl does not present himself as a perfect businessman. He presents himself as someone who made mistakes, trusted the wrong people, lost everything, and still found the courage to stand again. After the speech, Leonard approaches him. He tells Carl that the audience will remember those words. Carl smiles and says that he hopes they remember something even more important. Never forget the people who helped you when you had nothing. Leonard understands exactly what Carl means. The story comes full circle. Long ago, Carl saw a struggling boy and decided to help him. He never asked for anything in return. Years later, That boy returned as a powerful CEO when Carl was at his lowest point. Together, they faced betrayal. They uncovered a conspiracy. They defeated powerful enemies. They survived sabotage. They entered the greatest industrial competition in the world. And they won. But their greatest victory was not the competition. It was proving that betrayal does not have to be the end of someone's story. Carl lost his fortune, but he did not lose himself. Leonard gained power, but he never forgot humility. Their relationship proves that genuine gratitude can survive years of separation, and that one good action can have consequences far beyond what anyone expects. Carl eventually looks at the new company headquarters one final time and remembers the man he used to be. He no longer feels anger toward the person who lost everything. He feels compassion for him. That man did the best he could with what he knew at the time. Now Carl knows more. He knows that family is not always defined by blood. He knows that loyalty must be earned. He knows that success means nothing if you lose your values while chasing it. And most importantly, he knows that when life knocks you down, losing everything does not mean you have nothing left. Sometimes, it simply means you finally discover what truly matters. Leonard stands beside him as the company lights shine across the city. Carl smiles and tells him that they still have a lot of work to do. Leonard laughs and says that he expected nothing less. The two walk back into the company together, ready for the future. And that is where Carl's story truly ends, not with the destruction of his enemies, not with the trophy from the world's biggest competition, and not even with the return of his fortune, but with something much more valuable. Carl gets a second chance to build his legacy, and this time, he builds it on trust earned through actions, wisdom gained through failure, and kindness that continues to pass from one person to another. The man who once lost everything discovers that his greatest treasure was never the empire. It was the people, lessons, and values that remained when the empire was gone. And Leonard, the boy he once helped, becomes living proof that no act of genuine kindness is ever truly forgotten. Their journey reminds us that betrayal may take away possessions, money, and power, but it cannot take away courage. Enemies may try to bury someone's name, but determination can bring it back stronger than before. And sometimes, the person who saves you from your darkest moment is someone you once helped when they needed you most. Carl thought he was rescuing Leonard all those years ago. In the end, Leonard was the one who came back to rescue Carl. And together, they proved that a fallen empire can rise again when it is rebuilt with courage, loyalty, and a purpose greater than revenge. And that's where this incredible drama story comes to an end. If you enjoyed Carl and Leonard's emotional journey, their fight against betrayal, and their amazing comeback, then don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and share this story with your friends and family. Your support really means a lot and motivates us to bring you more interesting drama explanations and reviews. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video with another amazing story. Take care and keep supporting the channel.